Okay. I've been spending a lot of time talking to you about the parables for about a month. Anybody have like a favorite parable? Parable they love to hear about? Oh gosh, it's going to be like this for the next 20 minutes. So how do I get you? How do I get you connected? Okay. So the parables are interesting. I can talk to you about them forever if you want to engage me afterwards. I have like 500 ideas in my head about the parables. I've researched a gazillion books, a bunch of articles. They are really an absolutely fascinating way that Jesus engages the world. Out of all the ways he could bring his teachings alive, he gives you this memorable, portable thing that operates like a mirror. I remember growing up and I would go to carnivals or lawn parties that had a house of mirrors. Anybody go to one of those? And if you stand, oh my gosh. It's like you're staring at me, you think I can read your minds. I can't. So there's like a mirror that if you get in front of it, it makes you like really tall or it makes you really skinny. Another mirror makes you kind of wavy and makes you short. And if you turn your body just exactly the right direction, it makes you disappear completely. I'll disappear like green beer at O'Connell's on St. Patty's Day. Disappear like UVA Cavaliers from the NCAA tournament. Disappear like a Trump cabinet appointee. Poof, you're gone. Now, when Jesus is doing his story, when he's telling his parables, putting them in front of people, he does just the opposite. Instead of funny mirrors, it's a magnifying mirror. Like maybe you have one in your bathroom that kind of makes everything larger, or maybe you've seen one in a hotel bathroom. You can use it to put on makeup, use it to shave, use it to go after zits. So a mirror that makes everything like really, really big. So what Jesus is going to do is he's going to take a story. And like I forever thought I had to identify, like in the prodigal son, that the waiting father was God and the one that ran away was me. But I've now decided that the parable isn't understood best by identifying the characters and who they are equal to, like it's an analogy. But it's instead about the action that happens. It's not so much about the nouns but the verbs, not the things but the actions. Not identifying the characters' names, but identifying the character trait. So you're paying attention to what's happening between people. In the story of the Rich Man and Lazarus, you're going to see this phenomenal exaggeration of incredible wealth, richer than any person you've ever heard of or ever met in your life, and incredible poverty, unlike anything you've probably encountered. These two exaggerated things. Now, to explain exaggeration, I have brought with me my copy of the 1938 action comic in which the character Superman appears for the very first time. This sold in 1938 in a West Virginia store for 10 cents. In its pristine condition, this magazine sold at auction for $3.2 million. This exact copy was not the one that sold for $3.2 million. I got it on Amazon for $9.90, but I'll sell it to you for $300,000. And you can tell anybody, any story you want to about where you got it. Can I read the front page just because I love comics and I have a whole collection at the house, and so I'm going to read. It's got Superman in the block print, red letters with blue backgrounds, just like the thing is of Superman Forever. It started in 1938. Okay. As a distant planet was destroyed by old age. I think that's like the worst way to begin a comic of all time. At this stage of my life, it just seems inappropriate, right? As a distant planet was destroyed by old age, a scientist placed his infant son within a hastily devised spaceship, launched it toward Earth. When the vehicle landed on Earth, a passing motorist, discovering the sleeping babe within, turned the child over to an orphanage. Attendants, unaware the child's physical structure was millions of years advanced of their own, were astonished at his feats of strength. When maturity was reached, he discovered he could easily leap 1/8 of a mile, hurdle a 20-story building, raise tremendous weights like the girder of a building, run faster than an express train, and that nothing less than a bursting shell could penetrate his skin. That's 1938. So Superman isn't flying yet. He gets everywhere he goes by hopping, right? Because he's like a grasshopper. He goes boing, boing. So by the 70s, Superman has become invulnerable. He now is faster than the speed of light. He can withstand a nuclear blast. There is nothing that can penetrate his Superman skin, so that Superman becomes invulnerable. And on that day, in that moment, Superman comic sales plummet, because there is no story you can tell about somebody who's invulnerable. If there is no suffering to be overcome, there's no beginning, middle, and end to a story. It's just da-da. So the most popular comic book ever sold is what? The Death of Superman. They have to kill off the character who can't die so that they can resurrect him to be a character with vulnerabilities. In this story that Jesus tells, this story exaggerated about a person's wealth and a person's poverty, you're going to see the vulnerabilities of these characters like you can't imagine. So I want to read the story to you, and I'll tell you stuff as we go through the story to help what the listeners in the time of Jesus would have heard. So a little caveat as we start. Know that these stories that Jesus tells, these parables, these pithy little sayings, this is the longest one that he tells, the story of Lazarus and the rich man. It is the only parable in all of the Gospels in which a character gets a name. So that name, of course, is something we ought to pay attention to, right? So you ready to go? I mean, I just worked really hard. You got to give me something back here. Like, church has got to be the most fun place you spend the entire week. And like, you're my fun. If you don't do this, if you don't do this, when I go home, Sharon's waiting for the snow to come, I do the sermon all over again. And she has to give me the reaction that I've been looking for. Okay. There was a rich man. You may have heard him called Davies. Have you ever heard that? That is the Latin translation of the Greek word rich man. But the original says there was a rich man who was dressed in purple. Purple was the most expensive textile in the time of Jesus. So it's incredibly unusual to have somebody wearing purple, but especially to wear it every day as they're going to sit down to eat by themselves. Okay. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen. The word used for fine linen we find in the Old Testament on the days when the temple was created, and it was the outfit that the priest would wear. Priests would have a chance to serve in the temple once a year by lottery, and when they went, they put on their finest clothes imaginable, because these are the appropriate clothes to wear in the temple when you're serving God. The rich man is not serving God. He's not serving anybody, but he is the definition of self-interest. That's fascinating. I think so too. And at his gate, he lives in a place that has a gate, lay a poor man named Lazarus. Lazarus means God helps. This is like a blues song that says, if God doesn't help you, nobody will. Right? At his gate lay a poor man. Before we go too far, I want to make sure you have this kind of mind, so your mind sees this appropriately. When Jesus tells stories, he is a brilliant, genius storyteller. He gathers characters and he puts them in places you wouldn't expect, and he does twists to the plots that are unusual. He uses metaphor and analogy, but never does he tell us that the story is true, that it's a high-definition view of the world. When he tells the story of a boy running away from his father and living among sexual perversity and getting rid of all of his money and eating with... It's not that he knows anybody like that. It's a story he's telling, so you'll watch the interaction of the characters. And when he comes home, it isn't him coming home that's the point. The point of the story is the brother who won't join the party. You can imagine the brother just sits in silence while the father is saying really interesting things. But they just sit in silence, staring at the father, like, what in the world are you talking about? Nobody got that. Okay. So this is not meant to be a high-definition canon recording of what heaven and hell, what the afterlife is like. This is meant to create an interesting setting surrounding these characters with plot, with props that make you go, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more. That's what So you get that this isn't about heaven and hell, but it's about heaven and hell? It's a story, it's a folklore. He's trying to create a reaction within you. He's exaggerating, and every part of the story is exaggerated. Okay. The poor man died and was carried. Oh, I forgot part. Lazarus was covered with sores. It's as if he is a first century Job character in which he has lost everything. He has no family who is with him. He has no children, no wife. He is a poor man. He probably has been picked up by his friends and laid at the gate of a rich man, believing that the rich man, who is a Jew, has this obligation to care for the poor, that we are our brother's keeper, that it is in keeping with Jewish custom that you give alms to the poor, that there's some kind of way that you reach out. There was a rich man who was dressed in fine linen, who feasted sumptuously every day. His food, this feasting sumptuously, that word feast comes from the Old Testament, and it means those 3 to 5 times a year when there is like a Thanksgiving celebration in the Jewish community in which you invite everybody over to your house, and everybody has the best food that possibly can be provided. You eat like this a few times a year. So he wears purple and fine linen and feasts sumptuously every day, sitting by himself. Do you get the kind of exaggeration? You don't know anybody like this. He wants you to make sure you get who this person is. This person who has servants who wait upon him. This person who could have said to the servants, take one of these plates of feasting food and put it down on the ground next to Lazarus like we feed our dogs. Could have done it, never does, right? Jesus tells the story that we should be storing up treasures where? In heaven. Very good, very good. Storing up treasures in heaven. And the way you get into the bank deposit of heaven is how? By giving to the poor. By attending to the sufferings of somebody else. To know that the whole world isn't about you, right? That we're in this together. That we're a tribe. That we belong to each other. That the suffering of another person is worthy of your attention. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. That's just like this great story, right? The story's finally changed. We've now got a plot twist that you wouldn't expect. The poor man doesn't just get died and buried into a common grave, but instead the poor man gets the curtains part, the angels. Carly is beginning to sing. Andreas is playing the guitar. I guarantee you there's bass and drums, or there's no reason to have music. And it just carries him all the way up into Abraham. Abraham's father Abraham, right? So I guess the Jews do go to heaven. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried, so he had somebody to bury him. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out. Does he call out to Lazarus? He doesn't even think he's worthy of being talked to, like they're somehow the same kind of creature. He doesn't even... Father Abraham. How does he have the right to call him Father Abraham? Like, has he acted like a member of the family? Is he part of the Abraham tribe? Has he done anything that Abraham taught or any of the Jewish community taught? No, but he still thinks somehow because of his heritage, he can claim that Father Abraham's one of his. Father means the one who provides for. Isn't that just a strange word that he's using? The one who is so concerned about his own provision that he can't share with anybody else in the world, now wants Father, the one who provides, to take care of him. Do you get how this thing just turns on itself? Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus. He knows his name, though he never called him or talked to him in his life. He knows his name. Send Lazarus, like Lazarus is a dog, like he's a servant, that of course this is Lazarus' place in the world, he should be serving me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames. I did this sermon last night, and a woman who is like a better Christian than I am, better than I ever will want to be, said to me, do you know what I get out of that story? I said, what do you get? She said, I feel so sorry for the rich man. I went, oh, you just get you got it all, right? The empathy, that she cares for everybody. I'm telling you, she's a much better person than me. But Abraham said, child, just such a kind thing for Abraham to say, child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. You know he had evil things, and you didn't pay any attention. You know. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides, Between you and us is a great chasm, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot, and no one can pass from there to us." Then he said, "Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they may not come into this place of torment." Do you think he learned anything? Right? Tell them to go help the poor. Tell them it's not all about them. Well, what does he say? Tell them to avoid the pain. For them to avoid their pain? Does no one else have pain in the world? What is wrong with you? What is your mindset that thinks nobody else in the world has pain? Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." And he said, "No, Father Abraham." He has been saying, "No, Father Abraham," his entire life. "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." Do you remember a person who rises from the dead, also named Lazarus, who had been dead for 4 days? And Jesus goes in front of his tomb and says, "Lazarus, come out." The next thing that happens, because of the popularity of that miracle, is the Sadducees and Pharisees, the rabbis, and the Romans begin to plot Jesus' death. Even if one rises from the dead, they will not believe. It's like when the heart becomes hardened, nothing can get in. And that's the scary thing about being a human being, isn't it? That the choices we make change what we desire, and what we desire changes who we are. This past Thursday night in New York, an off-duty firefighter named Robin Dodge smelled smoke and saw flames and heard screams from inside a neighbor's house. This heroic smoke eater, as they're called in New York, pulled a queen's grandmother and 2 grandchildren from a raging fire. When he was interviewed by the press, he said, "I'm not a hero. I just do what I do by instinct." You and I know that the way we're trained becomes the instincts we possess. And so he was just doing his training. His wife, Crystal, said, "It's just who he is. He's Superman." He was walking home from work after getting out of the subway. He saw thick black smoke pouring out of a neighbor's house. A child had been playing downstairs in the basement and accidentally started the fire, and was so frightened by what they had done and by the flames themselves, they grew silent. Dodge was a 5-year veteran of the New York Fire Department. He has 3 kids of his own. And when he heard the screams coming out of the house, he said, "When I heard the children screaming, I thought of my 3, and it hit home." Without a hat, without an oxygen mask, without protective jackets or pants or boots, he went through the front door in a room filled with smoke. And there he found the grandmother who was a victim of a stroke, who could stand up at her sofa but could not walk. He gathered her up and the 2 children, and they made their way out of the house. He took them to his house, put them on his sofa, gave them food and gave them water, and put a blanket around them. So when the paramedics showed up, they knew to show up at that man's house where the children were safe. If you were to ask him what he did, he says, "I am trained to survive in chaos." Who wouldn't do what I did? Right? It is part of what you and I are made to do, to have the empathy that God has. That when God sees us, it isn't just to judge us as going to Hades or heaven. That's the funny part of the story, is God is empathetic for our pain, the world we live in. Our suffering matters. Dorothy Boger, who works in the reception desk at Aldersgate, a year and a half ago asked if I would sit down and talk to 2 friends of hers, a couple. And of course I said yes. And because of your generous contributions to this church, I have an office where they could come. They wanted to talk to me. They were my age. And their preschool grandson had just died from the flu. It's the kind of thing that hits home for me because I love my 3 grandchildren, 2 at that time. And I couldn't imagine a world that seemed less fair or less right, or how I would put my life back together if they somehow disappeared from it. Like I'd live forever without them, but now I can't imagine a world without them. And after we sat there and talked, we came into this room to pray. And we just sat here for a long time. Now, this required no super rich abundance of fine linen or purple or sumptuous meal. It didn't require Superman kind of strength. It just required the willingness to be present and to pray. That's all. That's what you would do, right? That's what you would do. To attend to the suffering of another human being like God does. Yesterday at noon, I was part of a Lutheran service in this room. Lutheran because the woman I sat with 3 weeks ago was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died this past week. 3 weeks. And her husband wondered if they could do the service here. There were members of Epiphany Lutheran Church on George Washington Parkway, just across from Belvoir as you go to Route 1. And the building's not large enough to handle the crowd that was coming. I got to work with their pastor, Dr. Graham. And we did a Lutheran service inside of the Methodist Church. But it's what you would do, right? You just pay attention to the suffering. But what kind of suffering is it? So when Bob is losing a grandchild and now his wife, unexpectedly, when he's losing them both, he's standing up here to tell the story of how he's going to attend because the mother of the boy Benjamin who died is obviously pregnant with another boy. And he says to her, I'm going to learn how to change diapers this time. How do you not attend? It is possible for us to forget the values that matter most in the world. To be shaped by things that aren't worthy of us. To say yes to things that aren't right and no to the things that are. But there come moments when somebody shakes you, holds a mirror in front of you, enlarges your character, and says, is this who you want to be? The rich man in torment. I love the parables. I love the parables. So I just want you to know that God is attending to the suffering of the world. Yours and those around you. And that the core of the faith of Jesus is that we attend to the suffering of our neighbor. I offer to you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.